You have good attitude. Will help with the horror to come. You know, doing a revisit on a show like Doctor Who, you may not think this, but the ones that I get the most nervous about doing a rewatch on are the episodes that I love, because you get worried that going back, knowing what's going to happen, not getting as swept up in it in the moment, and turning a more critical eye to it, you're going to start to spot things that you missed before, or things that now that you have more time to think about maybe don't work as well as they did, or maybe you just had forgotten certain cracks in the thing. Now, if you're very lucky, not only will that not happen, but you'll discover whole new reasons to love the thing. I was not very lucky with World Enough in Time, and I need to put so much emphasis on this right now. It is really good. I need to stress that up front. But the thing is, I know it's really good. You know it's really good. But my brain zeroed in on stuff that I'm like, that's not quite landing this time. And unfortunately, that's probably going to take up the bulk of this review. So, fair warning as far as that goes. I don't think I'm going to be ripping it apart, because again, it's still really good. It's just not as good as I remember it being. So, why don't we start with some of those good points? Missy, her stepping out of the TARDIS.
Hello, I'm Doctor Who. These are my disposables, Exposition and Comic Relief.
And I had completely missed the line before when Nardole says,
We're not functions.
Darling, those are genders.
like that. I got a huge kick out of that. That was great, because actually, as far as at the very least modern Doctor Who goes, yeah, that's been true. If there's been a male and a female companion, the female companion's there for the exposition and the male companion's there for comic relief. What do you think was going on with Amy and Rory? Or Rose and Mickey, for that matter? So that was a line that was great and I hadn't caught before. I like the whole idea of Missy trying to be like the Doctor and the Doctor using it as a test for, are you actually going to be getting better? I'm going to put you in the field and see how you perform so that it's not just you saying it. And I love that as a premise. The whole idea of the ship, this massive 400-mile long ship that is trying to get away from a black hole, but because of how long the ship is and because of the weirdness that goes on with black holes and gravity and how gravity can impact basically everything, including time. I don't know how scientifically sound this is, but like it was a really neat idea and I love it. I love the idea that the time at the front end passes way slower than down at the bottom. So even though the Doctor is not really wasting time, he's moving as quick as he can, Bill's down there for years. And that is a really neat idea and a really tragic idea, knowing how long she waited for him while simultaneously knowing that he got there as quickly as he could. It's, yeah, that's a lot. And then there's the Cybermen. Now, this obviously borrows a great deal from Spare Parts, which is a Big Finish audiobook that I've actually done a review for before and is also really good. And it delves into the origins of the Mondasian Cybermen. And I love so many little touches that emphasize how horrifying this is. And that they were able to take the classic, honestly, very low budget look of the original Cybermen and make it truly horrific again. That something as basic as just it's like a stocking over their heads, but it makes it terrifying. And the whole thing, when Bill goes into this room of all these people just hooked up to IVs and sitting there, and one of them just hitting this key, pain, pain, and a nurse comes in and adjusts a dial, and he stops saying it. And you assume, oh, she adjusted medications. She even actually like, there, isn't that better? But then when you realize all she did was turn down the volume. So yeah, it's better. It's better for her because she doesn't have to hear about it. But also, even though like we kind of get this surgeon character who seems to be orchestrating things a bit, this doesn't make the mistake that Age of Steel, Rise of the Cybermen did back in Series 2, which is to give the creation of the Cybermen over to one singular person, because then it's basically just recreating Davros and the Daleks. Whereas here, the emphasis is on this population is sick, this population is dying, this population is running out of options for how to survive. And they're at a point where they know how they can continue to live, but it will not be a pleasant existence. And the fact that the headpiece, it said flat out,
this will stop you feeling pain, but it will stop you caring about it.
That is horrifying. And it is brilliantly executed at every step of the way. And honestly, how good that is probably what either overrode my memory for some of the stuff I'm about to start complaining about a little bit, or had made me not notice it in the first place, because, all that having been said, there are some things that I noticed this time or that didn't work for me this time. The first is that, honestly, this episode is two stories forced to share space that thankfully aren't clashing with each other, but aren't really properly complementing each other either. And I come back to something that I actually said either one or two videos ago, that this series really is one episode short. Because we needed an episode that was just the Doctor monitoring Missy. But it's forced to share space with what happens with Bill and Missy's whole thing with dealing with the Master. Now, here's what I'll say about John Simm's Master. I'll say a couple of things, because he's a little mixed for me for a couple of reasons. Not all bad, not all good. Here's the first thing. I'm pretty sure that I said in my original review of this, link there, why not, that I wasn't entirely sure if he was necessary to be here. The thing is, though, he is, but he's only necessary to one of the two stories happening. He does need to be here for Missy's story, to really emphasize where she comes from, what she has been, solidifying the story of her trying to be better. So the presence of the Master totally works for her story. The thing is, though, he only gets revealed as the Master at the very end, which means for most of this, he's popping around as a completely different character who I like. I actually like Mr. Razor a lot. But internally within Bill's story, it doesn't matter that Mr. Razor is really the Master. It's just there to establish that he's been here the whole time. But as far as what he does, the way that he characterized his fake identity is 100% consistent from start to finish. The fact that he was really somebody else has no impact. You can remove that twist, and his time as Mr. Razor and the way that Bill interacts with him and the way that he contributes to her story is completely unchanged without that twist. So the Master needs to be here for Missy's story. But in order to have, he was here the whole time, we have this twist of Mr. Razor, who is a great character and who, honestly, first time I watched this, I didn't even realize was John Simm. I didn't recognize him, so props to him for that, and on the makeup. But it kind of exemplifies the two halves not quite being a happy marriage. Again, not clashing with each other, but not totally gelling either. So, I also found myself wondering why. Now, some of this might get addressed in the next episode. I'm going to keep an eye out for it. But as of right now, I have a lot of questions of why he does the whole Mr. Razor thing. Now, there were a number of questions I had, one of which gets a tossed off, in my opinion, kind of flimsy answer that actually brings up other questions. But my questions about this is, why is he on this ship in the first place? When did he get here? What is his goal in all of this? Did he know the master was showing up? And why did he spend years pretending to be somebody else in front of somebody who has never met him before and doesn't know who he is? Now, that last one does kind of get answered because the master says, I have to pretend to be somebody else because, if you've been their prime minister. So that still brings up questions of how did he figure out exactly when and where Bill came from if he didn't have the ability to ask her anything? Because he's in the Razor persona as soon as she wakes up, and he seems to be established as that. And obviously, he doesn't have to disguise himself for the Mondasians, but he does kind of for Bill, because Bill might recognize that prime minister we had one time. But it brings up the questions of how the heck he knows he has to disguise himself from her, because how does he know when and where she's from? That's okay. So that's kind of dealt with, but why is he here? What brought him here? And it's not to connect with Missy. We know that because he says that he didn't recognize and realize who she was at first. So he's not here intentionally to run into her. So what's he doing here? And is the fact that the doctor happened to show up an absolute blisteringly bizarre coincidence? Because that is a big coincidence that they just happen to run into each other, especially when I don't even know what the master's plan is. Again, some of those questions may get addressed in the next one. I will keep an eye out for that. But self-contained within this episode, that revelation just brought up a whole bunch of questions that I'm like, I don't know about that. Some other things that don't work, honestly, screw this cold open. It's a cold open that means nothing until we get to the end of the next episode, and I hate flash forward cold opens and teasers like this anyway. I have a really hard time thinking of any story that benefits from giving us a look at what happens way later in the story. Like, I'm here for the story. Don't jump ahead. As a hook in, I guess, but the cold open's garbage. A couple of odd things that go on with Bill. First of all, she's a really good vehicle for her eyes on the Mondasians and watching everything fall apart around her. So she's really good for that. I'm a little bit thrown off at how antsy and nervous she is around Missy. Because honestly, the degree to which she seems to be like, she scares me. Are you sure this is a good idea? Like, we really shouldn't be doing this. Would be way more justified if she'd actually had time with Missy prior to this, but she really didn't. Like, she's no doubt heard about Missy from the doctor, and I'm sure from Nardole, and like, that justifies some of it. But the degree to which she is like, this is a terrible idea, feels like the kind of conviction that should be coming from somebody who absolutely does know who this is and has personal experience with them, and she just doesn't. Honestly, it's the kind of response that would have worked much better coming from Clara, because Clara had direct experience with Missy, and Bill doesn't. But other side, not specifically to that, but to Bill, I really love that in the beginning she owns up to being the human. Because while she may be expecting the doctor to keep her safe, at that point, it's very clear that this guy wants to kill whoever's the human. And she still says, it's me. I'm the human. Which speaks a lot to who Bill is. And is one more reason why I really love her as a character. So that was a good moment. And so ultimately, I do want to come back and stress, this episode is good. I think the problem is, because we only have 12 episodes instead of the old 13, that means that what should have been more or less 2 episodes, Missy and the Master and the Cybermen, they're forced to share space. Now, this story is majority Cybermen, but it does all the groundwork needed to set up missing the master, which is going to be way more important next time. And to my memory, the Cybermen stuff, aside from just Bill herself, kind of gets sidelined as a result. So you have these two stories, and they're just forced to share space, and they're crowding each other a little bit. And they're both really good stories. And because it's over 2 episodes, like one is bleeding a little into the other on both ends, but they're not kneecapping each other. It just isn't as seamless. And the seams are, there really needed to be another episode. Honestly, what probably should have happened was we start off with Missy, dedicate way more time to the idea of Missy kind of leading this mission, lead into Bill getting killed and captured, have a whole missing middle episode that is focused almost entirely on what happens to Bill, and then pick it up in the third one with dealing with the ramifications of Bill and then tying off Missy and the Master. But we're missing that middle one, and the way to marry it all together is not ideal and it's not perfect. But man, what works in here really, really works still. I just found more problems, which is always frustrating. But that's World Enough and Time. You rewatched it lately? What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. I have a Patreon. There may be a link. More likely you'll have to go down to the description because YouTube's busted lately. But there's also YouTube memberships, and there are benefits for every tier of support on both the Patreon and the YouTube membership. So check that out. It's my living. It's what enables me to eat and keeps this whole operation up and running. But even if you can't, like, share, subscribe helps me out too. But no pressure on that either, because at the end of the day, you are the council, and I am only running the meetings. Until next time, this council is adjourned.